Hi, could people turn off their microphones?
Good afternoon, everybody. And on behalf of WCVA, we would like to welcome all of you to this event. I just want to go over some ground rules before we all start. This session is being recorded in order for WCVA to create an accurate report as possible about the discussion. And we will have the WLGA will also be posting it in English only on their site. It is a facilitated discussion. Please keep your microphones and videos turned off for the duration of this session. This helps us to mitigate any background noise and usually allows for a better connection. If you would like to speak, please flag this in the chat function. I'll go through that in a moment, and we will note this. As there are lots of participants today, please be patient, as we may not be able to hear from everyone. If you aren't able to contribute by speaking, we welcome you to participate throughout the session in the chat, and we will give an email address out at the end of the session, which you're welcome to use for any further comments or feedback. Please keep contributions to around 30 seconds in length so we can hear from as many people as possible. We will try our best to make sure that people who wish to speak can on a first come, first served basis. When you are called to speak, and Fiona Liddell will be pretty much looking after this, please unmute your microphone, and if you want to, you can also show us your video, but only if you want to. If you want to use the hashtag for this event on social media, such as Twitter, and the event series, this is event number 2. It can be found on the slides. It is hashtag ddyfodol gwahanol Cymru, or in English, hashtag different futures Wales. So it's on the PowerPoint presentation at the bottom. So for those of you who haven't been on a Teams meeting before, the main controls that you need are on a bar in front of you. So you've got a little clock. You've got a camera with an hour, you should have a cross across it if you've switched your video off. Now, several of you have got your videos still on, so if you can, those of you who've got your videos on, if you can press that button, it looks like a camera, and if it's off, it will have a line going through it. So I can still see quite a few people, Vicky Moller, Klinos, Vivian, Desiree. So that's the first button, is to turn the camera on and off. Then the next one is the microphone. So if that's off, you should have a cross through that as well. Debbie, I can still see your video, Debbie Johnson. And then the other options are across, you can see the show conversation, which is like a little speech box. So if you click on that, you can see the sort of meeting chat function. And I'm just going to put a bit of a hello in there. You can see that in operation. So everybody's
excuse me,
video is off at the moment.
Excuse me, the chat function's turned off. It's only available to team members at the moment. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, we'll have a look at that. Okay, we've asked for those of you who have just joined us. We've just gone through the ground rules for this video, and I'm just going to remind them a bit. Is we would like you to keep your microphones muted and your video off, unless you've been asked to contribute. So I'll just go through it again. There's like a toolbar in front of you which has got a microphone. There's a microphone and there's the camera. So I can still see a few people. So obviously we're gonna have a look at the chat function shortly before we get going. But we're nearly there. So I'm just going to pass over to Anna now, who's going to provide an overview of the events.
Right, thank you very much, Rodri, and welcome to everybody. Just on the chat function, some people have found it's worked if you sort of log off and come back on again. But yeah, as Rodri's mentioned, this is part of a series of events we're doing around preparing for different futures, with the first one last week, and we'll have 6 in total, 1 a week. We're running these as open sessions, and there's also a pre-survey that people have filled in beforehand, and we'll be drawing on that today, and there'll be another overall survey coming round. We're delighted that Jess Blair's doing a quick blog for us after each, and that Richard Newton and his team will be doing a report after each, and we'll have an end report. And I know that most organisations are very much responding to the immediate situation, but also we know people are starting to look to the future, and we will be sharing these with these reports with Welsh Government and others. And we hope it provides a space for us to work together collectively to look at how we can create a better future. We're really pleased today that we'll be working with this event with WLGA and One Voice Wales. So I'll hand over now. So thanks to Emily Forbes for chairing this session, Chief Officer of Barry Town Council. Thank you.
Well, Prynhawn da pawb. Good afternoon all. Yes, I'm Emily Forbes. I've been asked to chair today's event because I've got a sort of different lens across a number of sectors on this topic. Nationally, I've worked in Welsh Government with the Third Sector Unit. Regionally, I was Deputy Chief Executive at Gavo across Gwent. Locally, I'm Chief Officer now in my 4th year at Barry Town Council. So I understand the issues and challenges across the third sector and the public sector quite well. As many of you all know, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week with the theme of kindness, and I think it's really apt that we're talking about the topic of volunteering and building on the community response through this unprecedented time. So what are we here to talk about today? We know that informal groups have started up, for example, on Facebook or WhatsApp, in order to coordinate mutual help and support for the vulnerable in our communities. We also know that after COVID-19, some of these activities may cease. People who have volunteered their time may look at going back to employment. They may have other commitments or may need to pursue other issues when we get back into what some are calling the new normal that might be post-COVID. So the event today is to discuss what can be done to build on recent experience and to support and develop volunteering locally. So to start with, we've asked 3 people, leaders from across different sectors, to kick off the conversation by describing briefly in a few minutes what's been happening in their area and how they would like to see this develop. So if I can ask our 3 speakers to turn on their videos and their microphones, please. So first, I'd like to introduce Owen Wills. Owen is Community and Partnership Lead at Monmouthshire County Council. If you want to say hello, Owen.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And secondly, I'd like to introduce Sue Leonard. Sue Leonard is the Chief Officer at PAVS, which is Pembrokeshire Association of Voluntary Services.
Hi all.
And third, I'd like to introduce Councillor Mike Theodulu. Mike is from Pembury and Buryport Town Council and also the Vice Chair of One Voice Wales, the national umbrella body for town and community councils.
Hello everyone.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the three speakers. I have a little trusty egg timer here with me, so it's 3 minutes maximum each in order to allow contributions from everyone involved in the discussion today.
Emily?
Yes.
Emily, sorry, it's Rodri. Can I just ask Robin Grove White to switch off his camera, please? There's a camera in the toolbar. You can see like a little camera icon, and if you press that, it should turn your camera off, Robin. Thank you very much. Sorry, Emily.
Okay, so as I was just saying to everyone, I've got my little trusty egg timer. 3 minutes maximum, really, for our sector leaders to kick off this conversation by briefly describing what has been happening in their area and what they would like to see. So, Leslie, can you turn your camera off, please? And if Mariel can turn their camera off as well, please. And then Owen, back to you, and I'm starting your time now, Owen.
Thanks very much, Emily. So in terms of, I work for Monmouthshire County Council. As a council, you know, volunteering and community involvement has been part of our policy and design principles since about 2015. In terms of what's happening now, I've been leading a interdisciplinary team, which includes working with town and community councils, social landlords and our local CVC, which is Gavo, to support the phenomenal response to COVID from our communities. As Emily outlined, within our area, we've got 60 groups. We've got thousands of volunteers that are acting on a daily basis. But what we do know is they do need support, and they have been asking for that support because, you know, to give some examples, it's not just shopping and picking up prescriptions. One of the groups have supported an autistic gentleman who at the start of this spent all of his money on cat food and crisps. What they've been doing is working with him to generate a fantastic shopping list, which is appropriate, and then also getting that. So I just want to make the point that those COVID groups are not just about the physical picking and carrying. It is much more than that. And what we've noticed is our role has just quite simply been to create the conditions for this to happen in a safe and supportive manner. And we've been doing that with our CVC. The other side to this is we've been learning along this journey. We've had to move extremely fast. And what we found is that locally, those COVID groups have created their own solutions, which were the pace at which those communities needed. You know, I think organisations and others can learn a huge amount as an individual responsible for developing volunteering in our county. Our communities have just shown us exactly how you mobilise and how you get people behind something that they care about. In terms of what we'd love to see happen, we're already having supportive conversations with the COVID groups about what next. You know, the emergency response, you know, is coming to an end in some cases. They are now looking at what else can happen, from lovely social things like virtual open gardens to more planned things around how can these networks continue to grow after the initial stages of what I would like to see happen from a local government perspective is the work I've been doing around volunteering and community involvement. We've now got proof that this isn't free, that this is something that should be within and woven into policy, into local delivery. And I think that evidence that our communities have given us means that, you know, decision makers locally and nationally need to think very hard about the structures that we've got, about the support that is there, and what needs to. I think what communities have done is challenge the norm, and that disruption is welcomed in our area.
Emily, you're muted, sorry.
I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry, everybody. I muted myself and now I'm back in. I was just saying thank you, Owen. You were just over the 3 minutes, so good on the timing there. Thank you very much. And I was also saying it's about harnessing all of that energy that we're talking about and how do we move forward. We will be looking later at some of those, you know, moving towards change. So I'm going to pass over to Sue now, Sue, for your spot to tell us what's been happening with you and what you'd like to see, please.
Okay, thanks, Emily. As Emily said, I'm Sue Leonard. I'm Chief Officer of PAVS, which is the County Voluntary Council for Pembrokeshire. And so much like Owen, really, I mean, as soon as we were, you know, struck with the COVID-19 crisis, there was an instant response from communities. It happened very, very fast. Within a matter of days, we were aware of sort of that sort of sprang into being across the whole of the county. There was no consistency. Some were led by elected members, some involved town and community councils, some were led by faith groups or existing third sector organisations, but very many were just people getting together in their communities and deciding they wanted to help people living in their neighbourhoods. Some were very hyper-local, just a few streets, right up to most covered a ward, sort of a recognised community, and one was covering the whole of the county. So, you know, they sprang into being, as Owen said, so agile, so fast. And I think, interestingly, they came across problems and found their own solutions. So, you know, communities have got people in them with incredible skills and experience. So, for example, the issue about volunteer ID was solved very quickly by one community who happened to have a retired Microsoft programmer living in their midst. I think the county solution came a couple of weeks later, and the national solution followed on 3 or 4 weeks after that. So the speed at which people in communities can react is something to be admired. We did need to, we did want to offer support and help to these groups, and I'm pleased to say that now 85 of those organisations have kind of signed up to a Pembrokeshire Community Support Network. It is led by the groups. I'm pleased to see, which is one of the lead people who've brought coordinators together. They have weekly Zoom meetings. They share guidance and good practice. They've looked at little sort of, they're following other avenues like food distribution and production. It's really fantastic to see the energy behind the network. We've also, I think this is happening in Monmouthshire as well, but we also have a person-to-person skills exchange platform, which is something that's one of our transformation projects that we fast-tracked to help with COVID. This has been offered out as a tool for the PCSN, and it's one way that they might choose to look at managing and matching requests for help with offers of help. We've also seen, of course, a lot of the people whose day jobs in the public sector particularly have sort of ground to a halt temporarily, and they've been redeployed as volunteers. I think this does cause could cause a bit of an issue, because I think when we come out of COVID, they'll go back to their day jobs. People will still be shielding. There could be a bit of a gap opening up there. But the idea of employer-supported volunteering is fantastic. And then finally, we come to the more traditional volunteering space. We have over 600 people wanting to volunteer through Volunteering Wales. Not much to offer them, but a huge resource for the future. So thanks, I think that's probably my 3 minutes. So yeah,
I'm going to stop you there. So I think one of the big points that is really interesting is we talk about communities being galvanized from the response, but how do you harness all that informal work and informal energy without then putting that into a framework of bureaucracy or red tape or structure, and actually ending up suffocating some of those informal community groups and action that has already, you know, is managing perfectly well by itself. So I'll stop talking now, and I will bring in Councillor Mike Adeiladu to join us. Mike, I'm giving you 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'll talk about what's happening in the town and community sector. we've carried out a survey, and our data shows that 70% of all town and community councils have taken action to respond to this crisis through a variety of actions. They've also focused on capturing volunteering, and our data shows that around 15,000 volunteers have been engaged through local town and community council activities throughout Wales, and that's happened very quickly. Just about £500,000 from community council budgets has been directed to responding to volunteers and their activities during the crisis. And 65% of all councils have reported that they're working extremely closely and liaising closely with the unitary authority. So there's a vast improvement in the working together, the coming together of the local government family to respond to the current crisis. What sort of things have been happening? Well, I'll use my own council as an example. We've got staff and volunteers delivering prescriptions from chemists to those that can't come out of their house. We're supporting local food banks, picking up those gaps in what they need and supplying them with it. We're also helping fund them. One of the, I think, most interesting innovations that we've delivered is we actually top up the electricity meters to those who are really suffering because they're waiting for their benefits to come in. They've got no income and they've probably been without electricity for a number of days. It's pointless going to the food bank and picking up food if you're not able to cook it. So we are responding by topping up their electricity accounts to help them through the crisis. We help with shopping for people. We're delivering pet food packages to those who can't afford to feed their pets. And something also that has been very popular is every child in our community that has a birthday during lockdown gets a birthday hamper delivered to them from the town council. Now, who is actually volunteering in our community? It's very interesting because it's not those that have been volunteering before. It's not what I call your conventional volunteers. The response, as Sue has said, has been quick and has been almost overwhelming. We've got the rugby club, the football club, the cycling club, giving up everything and actually getting out on the streets and helping in any way that they can. We've got the Heritage Society, we've got individuals, we've got businesses, all responding to a crisis. This is the community coming together. This is not just volunteering in the old way, in the conventional way. This is a community response, and there is a major difference, and I'd like that to come out in the discussion that follows.
Great, thank you, Mike. Thanks for your contribution there. I think it's very interesting to see some of those different experiences across the different sectors, whether you're a local authority, a town and community council, or indeed a county voluntary council, a CVC, trying to help to galvanise that response. So I'm going to ask Rodri now, Rodri, if you could put up the slide with the 4 questions on, please. So these are the questions that have been asked of you all before you, when you signed up to participate in this webinar. And for the first question, what has been the impact of the community response so far? I'm going to draw on some of the little synopsis of notes that we've looked at. Just to feed in a couple of the key themes, some of which have already been discussed actually by our 3 speakers. So there's been issues discussed around technology and around organisations having to really embrace the change of digital platforms, home working, as we are today, using Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and looking at how their services can be put online or managed in different ways. There's also been talk of the pace of change with all of our speakers today, I think, as well, around how we've had to adapt, become more agile and flexible and respond to those local community needs, often without the framework in place or the emergency planning to do that. Not that that's the case for all organisations, but certainly some have had to react very quickly with little resource. Other issues in terms of volunteering is around some volunteering roles that obviously have had to be withdrawn, around the retention of those volunteers, some having lots of community volunteers coming together, but then not having enough resource to effectively coordinate, and some having reserve volunteers too. And also about issues such as online registration, safeguarding, DBS checks and guidance and support. So they're the sort of key themes, I think, that has come up in terms of the impact on volunteering of that community response. But now we're going to move to the second question, hoping to have a discussion on this then with our 111 participants. So I'm not sure you're all going to get the chance to have your voices heard, but we'd like to ensure that as many of you can be heard as possible. So the question is, what change do you think could impact in the longer term, whether good or bad? So Fiona, can I ask you to join us on screen, please? And Fiona's going to help to channel some of the participants that would like to come in and join us on this question. Over to you, Fiona.
Okay, so if you let me know in the chat if you'd like to respond to the question about where could this lead to long-term change, both positive and negative? And we're going to focus on this question for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll move on to another one. So get in quick if there's something you'd like to say. Just looking at the comments here. There's various comments in conversation. Anybody willing and keen to contribute and have the mic?
Okay, I'd like to put out one of the points around heritage organisations that's come forward have witnessed a closure of their services completely, which has impacted on their day-to-day volunteering. And I know a number of other organisations that have had to completely stop delivering their services, and that's actually sort of been quite difficult. So therefore, the impact on the longer term is how do they then get that back? How do they then retain the volunteers that they've lost? So does anyone have a view on that?
Just stick your name in the chat if you'd like to speak.
Okay, maybe we should start with some of the positives then. Let's start with the positives. So
hang on just a moment. I think some people might be using the hands up function. Let me just check that. Emily, let's just move to the... Oh, that's me put my hand up. I don't want to speak. Let's check if anybody else has.
Right. Well,
yes, there is. Vicky Harvey. Vicky, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm using the hand thing because the chat icon still says it's only available to team members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Carry on.
All right. Okay. I belong to U3A, University of the Third Age, based in Bangor. And so we are keeping in touch with our members through having regular emails. We've been phoning people who are not on our email list to make sure they're okay. We have weekly updates on information. And I think it's just got to be communications to keep people in touch with each other.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. So yeah, in terms of communications, we've also had a few comments in for, I think, the change that could impact longer term on a good and bad. I think the positives around technology and communication have clearly come through in this discussion, but also some of the difficulties of people accessing that communication if they're not used to doing it in terms of supporting their volunteers. I saw a message earlier. Can I just double check? I think Will wanted to come in. Will Tregaskis?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I'm at Cumby Museum in Aberdeen. Like every museum across the country, we have fully closed. A lot of volunteers would be considered vulnerable and potentially having to be shielded beyond any July reopening. So I think for the heritage sector in particular, where we do have a large number of people who we considered vulnerable and may need to be shielded, the heritage sector is going to have to diversify their volunteer base quickly and look to bring in volunteers from new sources, I guess.
Okay, so thanks for that, Will. So on that point, we have had some comments about having to look at diversifying volunteer roles and the volunteer base generally because of either reduction in numbers from certain sectors or increase in numbers from others. So is there anyone that would like to come in on that point about the impact of this in the longer term and looking at retaining volunteers or thinking of new ways of engaging with volunteers?
There's a few others with hands up. Emily, I don't know if it's appropriate to bring them in while people are thinking about that one. Can I just say, if you've made your point, can you put your hand down? Otherwise that will confuse. But Sian would like to speak, and then we'll come to Denise and then Patience. Okay, so Sian, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you. I work for a local authority countryside access team, and we have an incredible volunteer base. And like many organisations, unfortunately, we have had to step down that volunteer activity. The point that was made about vulnerable volunteers and shielding is something we will have to consider carefully, both in terms of the involvement of our older or potentially vulnerable volunteers, but also in terms of the nature of the tasks that we do, because it tends very often to be group work days, fixing a bridge, something like that. So there will be particular challenges about making sure that we can enable volunteering in a safe and appropriate way in the light of COVID restrictions. But also, I think, to think about, if we have shielding volunteers who still want to be involved in some way, what tasks can we usefully involve them in? And inevitably there will be things where they could really usefully help us. So we will have to think about their roles, I think, to try to make sure that those people are able to give their goodwill and their support, because I think not being able to involve them could lose our volunteers far more quickly than anything else. But if there is any guidance that comes out with regard to, group tasks and supporting volunteers and, sort of guidance about what's appropriate and when, that would be very helpful if that could be shared around local authorities and other organisations.
Thank you, Sian. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think at the end, when we look at how decision makers can help in moving forward, we can touch on that later as well. So Denise, you wanted to come in next.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Denise.
Okay. Mine was around very, very quickly looking at how many volunteers I could get, with the home base to work from home digitally, you know what I mean, and use things like Teams and Zoom and everything else, and its equipment. And of course, like many organisations, we don't have very much in the bank account, you know what I mean, and we don't have the resources really for that to be able to do that. We've been trying to get some funding. We were lucky where Paratoi, for instance, wind farm, they provided us with £12,000 so that we could get 3 volunteers set up, from their homes, talking to families and providing our service in a different way. But when we talk about advice and support, and otherwise we work in sort of more of an educational field about children with additional learning needs. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself properly there. I'm from SNAP Cymru. I'm Chief Executive of SNAP Cymru, and that's an organisation that supports families with children with additional learning needs from birth up to the age of 25, and it looks at how to make provision for them within schools, within the education sector, and then how health and social care supports that development and learning. And we use the legislation, obviously, to help families to understand what their rights are and how they can engage, and we try very hard to get young people and their parents or carers fully engaged with local authority professionals to make the best for the life chances of their child's future.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. I think I'm going to have to maybe bring someone else in now, Denise. But what I would say on that is that in terms of resourcing and future structures and funding, I'm sure that will come up again in our conversation a little later about the future of volunteering and decision makers as well. So thanks for that contribution. But we had Patricia waiting, I believe.
Patience.
Patience, yeah.
Oh, Patience, sorry.
No,
I've read it wrong from the comments.
That's all right. Hi, I'm Patience Bentu, and I'm the Community Engagements Officer for Race Council Cymru. I must start by saying it's amazing the work that is going on with volunteers within our communities. And it is highly commendable to see what they're doing within our communities. However, we fear that going forwards in the future, we understand that many of these volunteers will probably drop out post-COVID, only because from what we gather from within Swansea, for instance, a lot of the volunteers have either been furloughed from their regular jobs and will be returning later on, or they're students whose universities and other, institutions of learning have been shut down for the period of the lockdown, and who are looking for useful ways to help within the community. However, for those who will remain post-COVID and going forwards, I believe that it will be very important to provide the necessary support they will need through training.
Right.
And this is because we've taken into consideration the diversity of our communities, and we have also had issues with some volunteers not understanding, for instance, within BAME communities, the cultural needs of these communities. And because of that lack of understanding, they're not able to meet the needs within this community. So training, I think, is one of the vital areas that we should be looking at to be able to support volunteers going forwards.
Okay.
And also, the other thing that we've picked up, which I think Fiona, maybe it was the last speaker, spoke about funding.
Right, yes.
Is core funding, the challenge with core funding for third sector organizations to be able to pay salaries. We need to look into that. And the turnaround time, I've just mentioned that as well. But
yeah,
just
I
very
made
quickly,
these notes.
yeah.
Thank you for your contribution there. I think when we're looking next in terms of some of the biggest implications for the future, we'll probably touch back on that. I'm just going to ask, I believe I'm going to ask Carwyn to come in.
Emily, can I just chip in just to say, Carwyn is next. We've also got Ed who'd like to speak, but I think we then should move on to the last question, given the time. So I'm just giving people the heads up that we will move on then to have just a couple of contributions on the biggest implications for the future of volunteering, and particularly what would help to steer us to a better future. How could decision makers help? So people can be thinking about that. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, can I just also ask everyone to mute their microphones, please, because I can hear quite a lot of background noise for the recording. So, Carwyn, can we ask you for your contribution?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Brilliant. Yes, I'm Carwyn. I'm the Volunteer Centre Coordinator at Mantell Gwynedd in Gwynedd. I just think that, what's been happening over the last couple of weeks as a positive is the collaboration with the local authority. I know there's comments to be made there, and I think it's strengthened that relationship with partnership working, particularly on a strategic level, and I think that should be echoed across Wales and nationally, and the role of CVCs and volunteer centres in particular, which brings me on to capacity issues with volunteer centres and how we've looked at what our roles are now when it comes to emergency volunteering. So I think that needs to be looked at from a Welsh Government's perspective. We've seen the huge recruitment drive over the border in England with the NHS. Things have been a bit different here in Wales, and that's there's a lot of learning from that as well. I think on the negative side, post-COVID, the risks we are identifying is a lot of these community hub groups, they may be lost, they may go back to their day jobs, as people have commented before, and what's going to happen to those individuals? Will we see, an increased demand from the established organisations to, to start using those volunteers to fill in the gaps? We're already seeing as well some individuals taking advantage of some volunteers, those who are not particularly shielding, but see that there's a bank of volunteers here in Gwynedd and how they can, access that. One particular good positive we've been doing here in Gwynedd is obviously matching, monitoring Welsh-speaking volunteers. The previous contributor, I think Patience mentioned about meeting the diversity of the community, and I think that's been really, really important for us in Gwynedd to identify those who are Welsh-speaking, how many of those are Welsh-speaking, and matching them up to the needs of vulnerable people in the community. From a organisation perspective, I think it's part of their business planning as well. With these emergency, crises, I think it's part of the organisation should take that on board as well as part of their business continuity planning.
Diolch, Carwyn. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now going to look at, obviously we haven't got that much time left, as Fiona said, so we're now looking at the biggest implications for the future of volunteering, and specifically thinking about how could decision makers help in that. So we've heard some points raised there around training, around provision of funding, of core funding, of structures, of capacity within the third sector infrastructure to support, also about issues around diversity, cultural needs, and digitalisation and digital competence. So in terms of looking at the biggest implications and how decision makers might help, who would like to come in on that conversation?
I know Ed had a hand up. I don't know if that could be a point that's relevant to this question, Ed, or whether, if not, then you might like to put it in the chat.
Well, it is actually. It's both the last point about long-term change, and it's the next point about the future of volunteering. So we combine the two. From one Humphreys to another, Carwyn. So I'm Ed Humphreys, Town Clerk at Newtown Town Council. And like most of you, we saw the rapid coming together in a very loose group of volunteers, but they were the movers and shakers of the community, with some notable absences. People who ostensibly say they're volunteering or want to make some community effort, but actually didn't show up. And prominent amongst that was the County Council. However, the long term is brought together one part of our community that I feel hasn't really been engaged before in volunteering, and that's parts of the business community. I'm not sure of their motives for being involved, but that doesn't detract from the fact that they were involved and contributed quite substantially to the effort. Now, the three parts of our community that really does need to come together here in Newtown is the public sector, through its town council perhaps, the third sector through various voluntary groups, but also the business community. And the long-term effect of that, I think, is the foundation of what can be town partnerships. I think without all three, you haven't really got an effective town partnership. And the town partnership, I think, is an area for growth in terms of the movers and shakers again, or the power and decision makers that actually shape our places, rather than just deal with individual crises or individual moments. I think it's the long-term strategic change about place making that is going to be the legacy, or could be the legacy of this.
Thank you.
I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Ed. Diolch. I'm going to cut you off there just to make sure that we can ensure that everyone else gets a chance to speak. So I think from that perspective, Ed, you're talking about a true partnership across all sectors, not just public sector with the third sector, but public, private and third sectors working together. I don't know if anyone else has got any points to make on working closely with local business through this pandemic, or if they've seen any local businesses supporting the volunteer and the community response. But any more ideas that want to come forward, Fiona? Do we have more to speak?
Yeah, we do. We have a hand up. I think, was that Rebecca that I saw who had a hand up? Trying to find it, flashed up at me. Rebecca, would you like to unmute?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll be really brief. Yeah, I spoke on the other webinar last week about the business response has been absolutely amazing, and I made a few comments about volunteers. You know, those of us who are working from home now feel much more connected to our communities. So on a personal level, from the employees' perspective, there's a massive opportunity, but also there's a much stronger will now, I think, for all sectors to work together. And we're having lots of really interesting conversations with people, you know, supply chains, procurement, it's all interlinked anyway. And without those strong communities, the businesses won't thrive anyway. And I think now more than ever, it's really thrown that into the spotlight, and it's something we want to hang on to and keep having those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I think in terms of joint working, obviously, most of you will probably be aware that One Voice Wales, WLGA and WCVA have put together a protocol for joint working around a response to COVID-19, around that kind of information sharing and mutual respect, and looking at co-production, which was a word that was very much around a number of years ago and sort of went off the radar as the lexicon of the day, but about doing those things together. And I think maybe that's where there is something missing around having something structured with the business community in terms of that, even though we do know that there are some communities and towns across Wales that are looking at place plans and place boards and trying to bring people together in that sort of environment as well. So in terms of looking at how could decision makers help, do we have
we've got a couple of contributors, Emily, lined up who've got their hands up,
okay.
And I don't know whether it would be on the biggest implications or the future, but I think we're actually into our last couple of questions now, yes, because that's all that time allows. So Sharon McCarney and then Millie Boswell, and that may be that is all that we have time for. Sharon, would you like to unmute?
Yes, I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say that we've got a terrific community here in Fishguard and Goodwick with many, many volunteers, and that the business community have been helping a lot by offering free deliveries. All the restaurants and the cafes are now doing takeaways, and it's all free delivery. So they're being absolutely brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And who else was waiting? Was it Millie?
Millie Boswell.
I was just looking at how decision makers could help in the future, and thinking about huge amounts of these sort of street level volunteers have got involved, and it's not a constituted or established group, it's a community organised effort. And I think perhaps decision makers, particularly funders, need to recognise that in order to maintain that volunteering momentum, people don't want to be involved in lots of bureaucracy and getting bogged down in constitution and things. So I think it's about recognising that and perhaps changing the way that we think about the third sector in its traditional sense, and recognising that.
Thank you. Thanks, Millie. I think drawing back on a point that Sue made earlier around how to help those informal groups set up via a network, offering them some advice and support, but without without sort of stifling that innovation and putting too much bureaucracy around it. And I think on that note, I'm actually going to go back to our three sector speakers. So if Mike, Sue and Owen could come back on screen again, please. So what I'd like to ask you is that, having listened to that chat and hopefully made some notes and had some thoughts about the conversation, from your perspectives, could you sort of offer, I suppose, what you're going to take away from this session and where you think we might be heading in terms of your sector and your organisation specifically? So Owen, I'll start with you, please.
Yeah, certainly, Emily, thank you. I'm going to touch on something that last speaker mentioned around proportionality, around how these groups are set up, and they absolutely love their speed, their pace, you know, their freedom to a degree. We need to support them. We need to allow them to stay safe, but we also need to not cripple them with the bureaucratic structures that come from all sectors, definitely ours. So that's something that I will take away from this, and something that we're actively working on with our CVC at the moment, and town and community councils, is how we best support this going forward. The other bit for me, which has come out loud and clear, and something that has been missing, if you like, in a positive way in the past 9 weeks, are those sector boundaries. You know, what I hear and what I feel on a daily basis is we've all got our own strengths and weaknesses, and we must use this as an opportunity to come together, not in a you know, due to legislation or whatever is there. Actually, what I've noticed in my area and in my community, in my street, is that people are brought together by purpose. We need to keep a purpose, and we need to keep supporting one another. And I believe these neighbourhood networks continue, not because people go back to work and it gets broken up. When people do good things for others, it's a feeling that's very hard to shake. And we've got thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands across the country of people that have done this. They're going to want to continue, but it's going to have to be flexible.
Okay, thank you very much, Owen. Sue, can I come to you now, please, to pick up on your thoughts, if you're there, because I can see your dining table and chair, I believe, but not you.
Oh. Well, that's very strange. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Sue. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I don't know quite what's happened there. I did have a problem at one point. I got kicked out of the meeting, so I had to rejoin. So something's obviously happened to the technology.
You could turn your video off if you want to, Sue, and just have your mic on.
I'll turn my video off. It's turned round, so what you're seeing is the behind my computer now. Right, sorry. So just in terms of, I mean, I agree very, very much with what Owen has said, and you know, I really. It's a very tricky thing, but when you just look at the incredible response to the COVID crisis, I think I put this in the chat. You know, what's happened is that the traditional, you know, approach to, oh, we need to do this, and then so we'll set up a partnership, and then we'll have a few meetings, and then we'll set up some work streams, and then we'll have a plan. And we've had to throw all that out of the window. We've had to work really closely and collaboratively with a whole range of partners. We've had to make quick decisions, and we've had to trust people. We've had to, you know, just put our trust in humanity. And for the most part, humanity has not let us down. So I think, you know, looking at, you know, something I think that the Future Generations Commissioner has said about putting kindness and compassion at the heart of public policy. We need to find ways of actively encouraging and enabling and supporting people to in a way that brings out the best of people. And most people respond to things that are right in front of them. If they can see what's in front of them, and they have sort of an agency, they know they can do something about it. So, you know, to use the buzzword, that's about empowerment. But it's just, if people can see what's in front of them and they feel that they've got the power to do something about it, they often will do something about it. And one of the sad things that we found is talking to people who are in receipt of shielding letters in lockdown and asking them how they are. A lot of them are saying, well, we're fine actually, because our lives haven't really changed. You know, they don't have a lot of social connections. They don't do a great deal of stuff. They're often trapped in their homes. Their COVID crisis, apart from the fact that, you know, they would be able to perhaps go and get their own shopping and prescriptions, hasn't changed their lives that much. So we know that outside of COVID, there's an ongoing need for community response all the time. But we don't want to live in permanent crisis. But we do need to find a common purpose that brings us all together. And I would suggest that that needs to be as close to community as we can possibly get it. And local community associations, town and community councils, elected members, local businesses. We've all got a part to play in that. So yeah, but I don't want, you know, they're actually at the moment, a lot of local groups are delivering a lot of what's in everybody's wellbeing plans, but I bet they don't know they are.
Yeah. No. Okay, Sue, thank you for that. I'm just going to quickly now pass over to Mike. So in terms of the Town and Community Council perspective, Mike.
I think we've learned quite a lot. One of the things we've learned is that the community responds quicker and a lot better and is a lot more effective if you give it the freedom to do so. Cut away the bureaucracy. No checks, no bureaucracy to go through. They just got on with it. And they're doing an excellent job, far better than the public sector could do in the current circumstances. And that's a huge lesson. Lessen the bureaucracy, free people to do it for themselves is a key lesson for all of us. I think if we expect to go back after lockdown to a world that was the same before the virus, we better wake up and smell the coffee. This is going to affect us for a very, very long time. Austerity, unemployment, and the ability of the public sector to continue to safeguard key services is going to continue to be limited.
Yeah.
Now, that requires us, therefore, to change from doing it to them to doing it with them. How can we achieve that? Firstly, by working together, and everybody has said the same, and I will repeat it. Hugely important.
Fantastic. Thank you for your contribution there, Mike. Okay, so all I need to do now really is just wrap up and to say thank you for everyone's contributions to this discussion today. Clearly, there are some concerns in terms of the future around resourcing and around training and funding needs, but clearly an appetite to look at doing things differently and to take that new norm, which is very different, as Sue was saying, to that old traditional way of approaching things, to take that new flexibility and that agility and to try and work at pace, making quick decisions, and to trust people and support people to engage with the response to this. So it leaves me to pass over to Anna now to ask her to explain what happens next and to talk a bit about future sessions. So diolch pawb, thank you all for participating.
Thank you very much. So I'll just quickly, it's been a fascinating conversation from my perspective, and I hope it has been useful for everyone, especially to have this conversation across voluntary groups, but also town community councils and local government. After this session, there'll be a blog that will go out hopefully early next week, and followed by a report summarising what's happened. That will be posted on our website. We really hope we can keep the conversation going, so please do tweet with the hashtag different futures Wales or ddyfodol gwahanol Cymru. You can also email the policy team at wcva.cymru, which is up on the screen now. If you have further comments you didn't have a chance to make now. There'll also be a wider survey coming out next week if people have further points they want to add. We'll have another session next week on service delivery, so please join us for that. And do vote on the Twitter poll that's coming out next week for what you want the final 2 sessions of this series to be. So I'll just finish by thanking Emily Forbes. It's been brilliant chairing in a really difficult meeting. So big thank you to that. And thanks for everybody for participating. And with that, I think it's 1 minute to go. That's also a testament to great chairing. And I think we're ready to close the meeting. You've got a minute, I suppose, to type in more comments on the chat if you wanted to. But yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you all.